Sunday Surefire podcast. I'm your host, the commish. Joining me today is the co-host, Aaron Downtown Brown,
Hey, hey,
and the other co-host, the one and only Ethan Weaver.
Kamish, how we doing?
We're doing great, boys. Doing great. We are taking a pause from the DFS shows we've been cranking out for you, a pause from all the redraft content that we've been delivering for you, and we're just going to go back to. I can confidently say, at least for Ethan and I, it was our favorite thing here in the fantasy football world, and that's the world of Dynasty. The constant 24/7, 365 grind that is Dynasty fantasy football. It's nice to get back into the swing of things on that front. And we're gonna just do a simple exercise here of guys that you want to buy and players that you want to sell. And it can be a buy low player that you think that maybe he's undervalued right there. That's going to be going up in value as their career progresses. It can be a guy that is expensive, but hey, you just want to spend the assets to go get him. And same thing on the sell side. Could go any different direction here. So not sure where we're all going to end up on this one, but let's just get it going. Pretty straightforward exercise here. We're going to talk buys. And Aaron, I got to know, my man, who are you buying in Dynasty right now?
Yeah, I'll definitely kick this one off. I'm gonna go with a guy that I wasn't really too much on my radar preseason, or I know we had many shows in the off season. I don't think we ever talked about him, but starting to talk myself into him a little bit more, and that's Jalen Tolbert, wide receiver for the Dallas Cowboys. I mean, for starters, he's only 25 years old. But I think he's kind of sneaked his way into being a dependable wide receiver too for Dallas. As we know, they're a very pass happy offense, and I think obviously part of that is due to the Brandon Cooks injury. But I mean, let's face it, Brandon Cooks is already on his last legs. What was news to me is I didn't realize that Tolbert was already on a 4-year deal, 4-year contract deal with Dallas. So I think he's got a great chance for the remaining of the year to kind of maybe start putting up some T Higgins numbers with opposite of CD Lamb. I mean, as I said, he's definitely going to be under contract through 2025, so he may lock in this wide receiver role this year, and then in 2026 he could possibly get a nice free agent contract in 2026. So I mean, there is a world where he could be a pretty decent focal point in another offense down the road, even if it's not Dallas. So I think he's young enough. I think he's shown he's definitely talented. He's impressed Dallas enough to give him a 4-year contract. I mean, it's cheap, so I mean they'd be dumb not to hold on to him and use him for these next few years anyway. So Jalen Tolbert, I mean, like I said, I've talked myself into liking him. I think he's just kind of been more of a guy on the streets for waiver wire redraft pickup, but I'm kind of thinking about him in dynasty as well now.
Yeah, the opportunity's there for him, just given the injuries to guys around him. And Dak is obviously a capable quarterback, but you never know with a guy like him. But I guess I'm more curious to see what Ethan has to say about this one. What do you think about Jalen Tolbert as the Dallas number two receiver at the moment?
So I kind of like buying Jalen Tolbert as a piece almost for 2024 because I do think he's going to have a ton of opportunity in the Dallas Cowboys offense. I don't think Brandon Cooks is ever going to come back and be the wide receiver two for this team. I think it's Tolbert's job to lose. And with all the focus on CD Lamb, Dallas needs a receiver to step up. I mean, obviously Ferguson does his thing, but they need another receiver to step up. And you saw last game where he scored, I believe, a little over 18 fantasy points. Tolbert can be that guy. I think he always offers a ton of upside week to week, being the number two option. Well, number three behind Lamb and Ferguson. But Jalen Tolbert, he got a lot of hype in the offseason and through camp. He's only in his second year. He's a young player. So I do think with this added opportunity, he should get better week to week. And with a pass happy offense like Dallas, having a young, explosive receiver like Tolbert, you can maybe throw in your last flex spot. It's not a bad place to be in week to week in Dynasty because I do think he's going to have his blow up games.
Yeah, I can see that coming, and obviously young player, long track record ahead of him to, or a long runway ahead of him to ideally be a productive piece. But whenever you talk about buys and dynasty, I think the price that you're paying to get this guy on your roster is always a very relevant topic of conversation. So I guess, Aaron, it's your guy. I guess when you think about buying Jalen Tolbert, what are you looking to give up to go get him?
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing that I like about him. I mean, yeah, he's not a high, prevalent name in the league. So you can get him really cheap, right? I mean, if you got a bigger deal you're working on, I'm pretty sure you can just add him as a throw in, right? And I think if you guys are already close to getting a deal done, honestly, it can be almost any trade you can think of. I think he can literally be a throw in. And the great thing about him is, if he starts to produce even more, yeah, you can sell high on him later. So, honestly, like, I mean, I think you name it. Like, I think you could just throw him into a, multi-person trade and just sneak him in there.
Ethan, do you agree that's probably the best way to go about buying someone like Tolbert?
It is probably the best way because when you just go straight up for Tolbert, like a third round pick's not going to do it. I think if I had Tolbert, I would definitely need a second round pick at the minimum, and I would probably want something a mid second round pick. I wouldn't sell him for a late second round pick just because the upside. Because I do think if you do give a mid second round pick to get Tolbert, I mean you do have a chance to have pretty good ROI if Tolbert comes into his own. But the thing with Tolbert, if I was buying him, I'd almost wait a week to see if he doesn't put back to back good fantasy weeks together. Because in this dynasty landscape, we're so week to week now with fantasy value. I mean, fantasy a player blows up, they're worth multiple first, they're worth, and then next week they have a dud week. Okay, now I'm only paying like a second. It's just insane the volatility of player value week to week in dynasty right now. Players just don't hold their value like they used to. It's what have you done for me lately, and lately is like literally last week. So I would like to maybe wait and see if Tolbert only puts up like an 8 to 10, 12 point fantasy week, something a little minor, you probably can get him a little cheaper just by waiting a week. But I do like the upside. I'd be willing to pay. I'd be willing to pay probably. I mean, easily a third, a projected late second. It would definitely have to be a late second just to get a shot in the upside of the Dallas Cowboys wide receiver 2 now and potentially into the future.
That was exactly the price point at the end there that you mentioned that you landed on. The late second or multiple thirds route would be something that I'd be willing to do for Tolbert. Anything more than that, I'm going to be out on him. I'll hold my mid or certainly early second round pick to see
Yep.
if I can. I think I can do a little bit better than someone like Tolbert if I'm going to spend that high. But yeah, he's someone I have mild interest in on the form of late second or multiple thirds. And Ethan's point about the dynasty landscape being so much more, what have you done for me lately? Is a great point. And it actually creates. I love it personally because it creates buying
Mhm.
opportunities and selling opportunities as well for different players. So if you're a savvy manager who's paying attention, it's really to your advantage if your league is operating in that manner. And I'm going to try to, my guy here that I'm going to buy here is a player that was crushing all year and he actually just had the injury bug hit him. So I'm staying in the state of Texas, but I'm going to the Houston Texans. I'm going to go buy Nico Collins right now. And I don't think what he's done this year needs a big sell job or anything like that, or for why you should want Nico on your roster. He was currently number WR2 overall in scoring so far in all formats this year and just 25 years old. He signed his extension last offseason. So he's going to be attached to CJ Stroud for the foreseeable future. And the other wide receivers around him are either aging, that's you, Stephon Diggs, or they don't profile to be a true alpha wide receiver. That's you, Tank Dell. So the downside, of course, in all this, like I said, he was placed on IR this week with that hamstring injury. He's going to miss at least the next 4 games. Going to return later down the road this season, but I think it is creating a dynasty a window to buy this player in dynasty formats. So I think in your leagues where that you play in, that you should be kicking the tires to at least see what it's going to take to pry him loose. And he's even, like I said, going to be back at some point this year. So even if he's somewhat diminished, he's young enough and has shown enough over the last 2 seasons to be worthy of a guy that you're investing in.
Yes, I agree with that call. Anytime a player of that pedigree gets hurt, I think you should always try to kick the tires, especially for a player that's going to come to be back in 4 weeks. So if maybe a contender has Nico Collins and they're a little nervous for the next 4 weeks, and you can get Nico cheaper than in what he was, because I mean, let's face it, if Nico continued this trend, he would almost be like unattainable. He just top five dynasty receiver. Those prices are insane. Now, as Kamish said, you have a small buying window, and the time is now. I mean, every week you wait, it's getting closer and closer to Nico returning, and that manager's like, you know what? I'd rather just wait. Nico was wide receiver 2 when he got hurt. He's going to come back and crush. So I always think it's a a smart. I think a smart dynasty manager does kick the tires on players that do get hurt, especially in this case where it kind of helps. I mean, you can buy Nico as a rebuilder, you can buy him as a contender because he's going to help you down the stretch. So definitely like to call with Nico Collins.
Yeah, I do too. I think especially, I mean, this literally just happened last year. I mean, both Nico and Tink Dell got hurt last year at two different times, and they both crushed the beginning, middle, and end of the year. So I think to your point, you can yeah try to get Nico on your team, and yeah, if you're trying to rebuild, it's great. And yeah, maybe I mean, the great thing is Nico's probably leading a top tier team in your league right now. So if they're hungry, if they're known to being, like kind of a win now team, then yeah, maybe try to take advantage of it. And maybe, IR really scares a lot of fantasy managers, but to Ethan's point, it could be as little as 4 games. So he could end up being a playoff winner for you too.
Yeah, I mean, he's definitely a guy that can fit just about any build in Dynasty. And I guess when you talk price point of what I would pay to go get him on my team, that's going to really depend entirely on what the manager currently holding Nico Collins is looking to do and what their situation is. I mean, if you're dealing with a manager who's looking to retool, or maybe they're just in a full scale rebuild, I'd be willing to, they're probably going to want things like draft picks. I'm willing to offer a 2025 first round pick, and I'm going to start with two second round picks coming back, or two second round picks also going out the door with that 2025 first round pick. So if it takes, and I didn't even go a step further, I mean, you play the counter game and negotiation, all that. If it takes two first round picks, I'll give you a mid to late first in 2025 and also a first in a future year if that's really what it takes to get this done. I know that might be a lot to pay up for a receiver who's banged up at the moment, but I think he's a player that can help you for the next 4 to 6 years in Dynasty, and those are the guys I want to buy.
Yeah, because there's no way you could have traded for Nico Collins with a single first and 2 seconds a week ago, right? Not the wide receiver 2, not the alpha receiver tied to CJ Stroud for the foreseeable future. So if you can get that deal done, that's something I would definitely do. And even two first, if you can give a 25 first and a 26 first to get Nico at this point, I don't think that's a bad price point at all, especially if that 25 first isn't projected top five, top six. Um, I just think Nico at this point, I think we've seen enough. I think Nico is like that dog, that alpha in this offense. He's the guy, and I think it's a pretty safe investment.
Yeah, just in case of that window being open really due to an injury. And I know, Ethan, there was one other guy. He wasn't quite your buy player, but there was one other player that fits into this category that you wanted to go to discuss. So who's that?
Yes, I did. One of my favorite receivers this offseason heading into 2024, and that's Rashee Rice. Unfortunately, Rashee Rice is going to miss the remainder of the year with an LCL injury, and Rashee Rice was on an insane trajectory too. I mean, he was ascending into like the top 8, top 6, top 5 overall dynasty receiver. I mean, similar to like a Nico Collins, just like on this ascent where like they're almost going to be unattainable. Anybody who had Rashee Rice, it would take a king's ransom to pry him from their team. And right now, you have a massive buying opportunity, especially if Rashee Rice is on a contending team. So if I could send a first out, a first and a second for Rashee Rice right now, I do that in a heartbeat and get his services for next year. Even a slightly lower level receiver that's producing right now, especially like I said, if Rashee Rice was on a contending team, I'd see if I could send one of those a slight down tier a receiver and maybe a second on top to get Rashee Rice. But the price point should be lower than obviously what it was because he is not going to score fantasy points this year. I just with the 4 month recovery, you don't have to worry at all about Rashee Rice going next year. I mean, he's just in such a prime spot with Patrick Mahomes in that scheme. And then the position he is in that scheme is just producing fantasy points. Look at Juju Smith-Schuster this past weekend. So I think Rashee Rice is definitely a buy right now for any dynasty manager. If you have the assets, even as a contender, that you can part ways to get him on your team, I think that's going to pay dividends in the future. But to get to my main buy low player, it's Trey Benson, running back of the Arizona Cardinals. And I think this is a pretty straightforward case. It happens every year. I mean, we hype up all these rookies. I mean, all these rookies are going to be RB1s, wide receiver ones, tight end ones, and it doesn't come to fruition right off the rip, and their values plummet. And I think you need to take advantage of that value dip, and you need to buy. And with Trey Benson, I mean, James Conner is playing great, right? But James Conner also doesn't stay healthy. It's probably going to happen where James Conner misses time. It's going to give Trey Benson opportunity, and I think he's going to take advantage of that opportunity because he's a very talented running back. Obviously, side speed specimen. They drafted him in the 3rd round. I do think he is going to be the starting running back next year. So if you can get him for a 2nd-round pick, I think you're going to get a massive return on your investment. The second he is named the starter for the Arizona Cardinals next year, he's easily worth a first. Trey Benson is just very talented. He hasn't played very much thus far this season. I do think at some point they're going to try to work him in, and especially if and when James Conner gets hurt, he's going to have all the opportunity in the world. I just think players like Trey Benson, even guys like Blake Corum, guys that have done nothing through 5 weeks, their prices go down, especially if they're on contending teams and their patience grows thin. I mean, like I said, Dynasty is so week to week these days. I mean, you have a guy sitting in your bench that you spend a 1st-round pick on, an early 2nd-round pick on, when they're doing nothing. Maybe they're willing to part ways with that player to get a guy that's producing for them now. So, but if I could buy for a 2nd-round, pretty much almost any 2nd-round pick right now, I'd move that for Trey Benson just because I think he should be the starter next season. And like I said, as soon as that happens, he's worth much more than 1 second.
Aaron, I know Benson was a guy you liked in the offseason, so you're probably. Is it safe for me to assume that you are in on this call?
Yeah, I definitely like that call, and you have a good memory. I think pre-draft, I drafted him like 110 ahead of Brooks in our mock draft. So yeah, I was really high on Benson pre-draft, and yeah, he definitely has the stock draft stock as well. And yeah, I've liked the little spurts I've seen out of him this year as well. But yeah, I think if you can find a manager who has him that has easily forgot about him, I think yeah, definitely an extreme buy low candidate for sure. And I love that Kyler Murray's kind of risen to the challenge this year too. I mean, he's leading that offense that you should be able to feel comfortable in the Arizona offense here in the next foreseeable, I guess, future really too. So I like running backs in good offenses as well. So it kind of checks all those dots for me.
Do you guys think this is another case, kind of like we talked about with Tolbert, where he's someone that you are looking for like a late set, give up like a late second or a 3rd-round pick for him, or including a bigger trade type guy?
I don't think anybody's selling for a late second or third. I'd be okay even selling an early second right now for Trey Benson. Just because, like I said, I think he's going to be the starter next year, and James Conner is most likely going to miss some time at some point this year. And even at that point, if Trey Benson comes out and has a few good weeks, he's probably going to earn himself a piece of that backfield. So I just know I have Benson in a league and I wouldn't sell him for a mid to late second or a third. I would definitely need an earlier second. I mean, I know some people like Aaron took Benson in the back end of the first. I know in other leagues he fell to the second. So maybe a manager is just frustrated and they're willing to just sell for what they paid, which may be an early second. So I'm willing to take the risk because I mean, a guy that's that size, runs that fast, and in a good offense like Arizona, I think the upside is just kind of hard to pass up.
Aaron, are you giving up 3 firsts for Trey Benson, or are you more
No,
or
me
less in lockstep
maybe.
with Ethan?
No, I mean, honestly, I like sneaking guys into trades. I do think you get more value in a trade if you like a couple higher profile guys and you're like, hey, throw in Benson and this gets done, you know. But I think it honestly it probably just depends on the league and the manager. Because yeah, sometimes those 1-for-1 trades can get a little like nitpicky. So I mean, you might have to be willing to give up like an early second, or else that manager's like, nope, no deal. So I mean, if I think early second is definitely a price point I would pay for. Yeah, probably not a first, obviously. Yeah, I would rather go the route I'd sneak him in or just a second, as Ethan said.
All right, so those are our buy players that we have for you folks. So go make sure you're snagging guys like Jalen Tolbert and Trey Benson on the cheap, and make sure you're paying up for Nico Collins. So let's give the listeners the other side of the coin, Aaron. We'll stick with you. Who are you selling at this moment in Dynasty?
All right, I'm gonna go kind of a prime sell high candidate. Kind of more on a contending team as well, but I'm gonna go with Dallas Goddard. And his age 29 season. Kamish, you're great at this. I'll put you on the spot. When's he turn 30?
When will he turn 30?
Yes.
I'm gonna say he is a no December birthday.
Close, January.
Ah,
January.
okay.
So yeah. I mean, you usually, sorry for putting you on the spot. You're usually spot on with birthdays. But yeah, I mean, it's his last year. You're gonna see the two on his age, in Dynasty, which I think really sticks out to a lot of managers. But yeah, I mean, right now he's tied in four in full point PPR. And yeah, he definitely has taken advantage with both AJ Brown and Devontae Smith injuries, who are also set to return in week 6. So, I mean, this is the time he's kind of soaked up the sunshine from them being out, and yeah, he is tight end for it, as I said. But I mean, yeah, the previous 2 seasons he was tight end 15 and tight end 11, which, yeah, if you're not a top 10 tight end, yeah, 11 sounds good, but it's really it's a big drop off, as we know at that position. So. Yeah, I think Dallas Goedert, definitely trade him while he's hot. If I can get a 26 first, I would definitely try to do it. That might be a little too much, but if you can get 26 in a small piece or reverse it and get a little bit better player in a second, I would do either one of those situations in a trade. But yeah, Dallas Goedert is my sell high right now.
Ethan, what do you think about Goddard as a sell?
You got to remember Dallas Goedert's tight end 4, and he has bye last week. So I believe he was I believe he was tight end 1 before that.
Sure.
Now my guy Brock Bowers is taking that over. So my bold prediction before this season is looking pretty good with Bowers. Um, but yeah, I think Goddard's a prime sell high. The offers I was getting in my tight end premium leagues for Dallas Goedert was insulting before he started going off. The last couple weeks without Smith, without AJ Brown, but I mean he's aging. He's a piece of that. He's a major piece of that offense when one or two of those other pieces are out. Outside that, he's just not going to get the volume, especially with Hurts kind of struggling through the air. So I think Dallas Goedert in tight end premium leagues. I mean, I'm a contender in one of my 1.75 tight end premium leagues, and he's a great third, fourth flex for me. So I like throwing him in there. But now with AJ Brown, with Devonta Smith coming back, his pop off weeks are probably going to be very limited. throughout this year. So I definitely think you should take advantage, especially to maybe a contender that's weak at tight end. Like, hey, he's tight end. He's tight end 4. He was tight end 1 before his bye. Maybe you can get a second round pick in a tight end premium league, especially if you're not a contender. But if you can get in a non-tight end premium league, if you can probably get any second, that's probably decent value for Goddard, because if you're not a top 5, top 6 tight end, you're not a difference maker. You're not winning. They're not helping you win a championship at all. So get a second round pick where, I mean, over and over, you see a ton of tight ends fall the second round that end up producing decent numbers over the last few years. Outside, obviously, tight end premium leagues, a lot those high end tight ends are round 1 guys. But like I said, in non tight end premium, I think if you can get any second, you probably should move off of Goddard.
The interesting thing about Goddard coming into the year, Ethan referenced some insulting offers that he got for Goddard, and the reason for that was because Goddard was kind of that guy who was, a lot of rankings you find him ranked like tight end 12, and that was kind of just like a cop out of like, well, he's been pretty good in the past and he usually finishes around there. But anyone who had Dallas Goddard on their team was kind of like, if this guy's my starter, I'm trying to replace him. I'm trying to upgrade at this position and use him as a backup and as a fill-in type guy. But with what pretty much all those guys who were ranked ahead of Dallas Goddard haven't done for us this year, it's created an unexpected sell window for him, because the rest of the tight end landscape this year has just been so terrible. I mean, all these guys that we banked on, we can sit here and name them all day, like Mark Andrews, and even Trey McBride hasn't lived up to it. If you spent an early pick on Sam Laporta, you hated it. It's not, just hasn't panned out. So I think this is probably the last sell window you're going to get on a guy like a Dallas Goddard, and
Yep.
I would be aiming for a first round pick in tight end premium leagues, and even a second round pick plus like a little something else. Like, can I go get someone like Jatavian Sanders with a late second round pick for Dallas Goddard in a non premium? Maybe I can do that for the reason that we mentioned with rookies who have gotten off to a slow start. I'd be aiming for something like that for Dallas Goddard to a team that's competing this year, and they're thinking like, okay, like Dallas Goddard, I know that guy. He's been solid in the past. Maybe this is a breakout year for him. I'm going to buy him and use him to contend with. So really strong call there, Aaron, on that sell and Goddard. Guy didn't really think of coming into the exercise, but I think definitely makes for a prime sell candidate in Dynasty. But Ethan, let's go to you, man. Who do you got to sell on in Dynasty right now?
As much as this probably pains like contending dynasty managers, I think Jordan Mason is a prime sell candidate. I think on both ends, right? I mean, if you're holding Jordan Mason as a rebuilder, why is he still on your team? One, because you should have probably reached out to the CMC manager immediately. But now, I mean, he's a weekly RB1 right now. I know he went for a first in a league we playing together earlier this season. So people are going to be willing to pay up for production in the now. And unfortunately for Jordan Mason, once CMC comes back, even if he'd still, if it's 60-40, I mean, Jordan Mason's not going to be a guy that you're going to want to start. So even if, I mean, if you're a rebuilder, he should be off your team like yesterday. But even if you're a contender, if I could like down tier, I mean, right now on Keep Trade Cut, he's RB20. So if I can down tier off Jordan Mason and get a running back that I know is going to help me for the entire year, even if it's like a Tony Pollard in a second for Jordan Mason. Tony Pollard is going to be the back for the Tennessee Titans all year. He's going to help you all year, and you still get the second on top, where Jordan Mason wasn't worth a second before this year started. So I think that's a pretty good return on your investment for a guy that's probably not going to help you win a championship down the stretch unless you're one of these people that think CMC is not coming back. But I do think CMC is coming back. And when he does, Jordan Mason is going to be stapled to your bench for the fantasy playoffs for the most part. So I think you need to be smart as a contender where, yes, the points are great now, but you also got to look towards the future and be like, how can I parlay this into a player and potentially picks that may help me actually in the fantasy playoffs. So that's why I think Jordan Mason is a prime sell candidate, because one, his window is now. I mean, you're never going to see I think a bigger spike in value for for a running back than Jordan Mason had this year. And I think you just need to be smart with it. I think, like I said, if you're a rebuilder, I mean, if you can get any first, he's off your team. If you can get Trey Benson and a second for Jordan Mason, I think that's a no-brainer as a rebuilder. But as much, like I said, as much as he is helping your team now, I think you also got to think about your future playoffs and be like, hey, he's probably not going to help me in come playoff time when CMC's toting the rock.
Aaron, is this a good sell window for Mason?
It is. I mean, I think Ethan, you made a great point that yeah, I mean, if you're rebuilding, what are you doing with Mason? But yeah, I think the very interesting point is if you're a contender and he's helping you win right now, I think he's still a sell. I think he's selling both scenarios because yeah, if CMC comes back around playoff time, or near playoff time, then he's not gonna help you. So it's one of those interesting cases that you might need to just try to figure out a way to part ways with him now, even if you're winning fantasy weeks, because you got to figure out how to win without him if you're a contender too. So it's interesting like that. So yeah, I would say sell in all scenarios.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. I mean, like, I kind of agree. I'm inclined to agree on that. I mean, because there is an expiration date, at least in theory, to Mason. So whether you're pivoting to try to go get a different position that's a little safer, or you're just trying to get some draft picks to help in a rebuild, I think it's a great time to offload him while he does still have some value. And I think running backs in general make for really good sell candidates in season. And that's why my next player here is also going to be at the running back position. I'm selling Brian Robinson, and I know that he's off to a strong start this year. He's averaging 14.7 half PPR points per game, and that marks good for RB8 overall in points per game among running backs who have played in every game this season. And he's RB7 overall if you just want to go look at the raw point totals at the position so far in 2024. I know he's dealing with a knee injury that's popped up the last couple of weeks. Yeah, he was able to not practice for most of last week, still got on the field, still actually hit the end zone twice. Despite seeing just 7 carries. So the fantasy production for the week was there. He gave you a high floor. But I just think it's kind of all coming together where he's had a really strong start to the year. His value is up. And like I said, it's in season. These are the times where you sell productive running backs that aren't considered to be elite assets, kind of like a Jordan Mason. But he's producing right now. He's 25 years old. He's attached to what looks like it's going to be a high scoring offense for a long time or at least the next 2 years. He is under contract through 2025. So there are points that you can use to sell to your league mates to say like, hey, there are good things with this player. He's producing right now. You're probably selling him to a contending team. And in doing that, you could do what you get in return depends entirely on what your situation is. If you're rebuilding, it's a great time to go find a contender and go grab ideally a first round pick with a plus on top. If I'm selling him right now, I'm shooting for a 25 first and something else with it, maybe a 25 third or potentially a 26 second. Like I want to really capitalize on him while he's producing. And if I'm in win now mode, what I want to try to do is package him with something else and go upgrade at either running back or at a different position if I'm deep at back and I want to kind of grab a receiver, tight end, quarterback, and super flex, whatever the case may be. Either way, I'm just trying to maximize on this window for a guy that has really gone up in value from just based on the production that he's given us so far in 2024.
It's hard to move on from Brian Robinson as a contender just because he's been so good and that this offense looks like it's going to be good for the foreseeable future. So he's definitely a guy that's hard to move off of. But I was never a huge Brian Robinson Jr., I guess, advocate. And I've been wrong. I mean, he's earned a role. He looks great this year. And he's the kind of player, like you said, Kamish, that I'm willing to kind of move off of by packaging him and a plus to up tier to a more stable, I guess, a more stable asset. So I definitely like that call. And then obviously as a rebuilder, if you can get any first for Brian Robinson, maybe a first and a little plus, I honestly wouldn't really care if it's too much of a plus. If I can get a 25 first and super flex for Brian Robinson, That's a pretty tantalizing offer considering that Brian Robinson coming into this year, you would dream of getting a 25 first for him. So I do think with the start he has, it's definitely a perfect sell opportunity because if he starts trending down, or maybe Eckler gets a little more work, Jane Daniels maybe vultures more touchdowns around the goal line. Who knows? But right now, he's definitely at the peak of his value, and now's the time to capitalize if you are willing to move off him.
Yeah, and that's why I think you can actually potentially get a 25 first from the right manager in win now mode that needs a running back where you could never have gotten it before. And I mean, just quickly to add a little more context to it, I mean, he's ranked as a back end RB1 in both Dynasty League football. Oh, sorry, as a back end RB2 in both Dynasty League football and Fantasy Pros Dynasty rankings. So, like the community, the experts anyway, that on these sites still, despite his fast start, aren't that high on him. But as we know in the leagues that we play in, we're in season. People want points, especially contending teams. So I think that they're more likely to give more than you would think, or more than they would have 5, 6 weeks ago for guys that fall into this tier. And it's a buying opportunity if you want to go ahead and upgrade at the position. Aaron, what are your thoughts on all that?
Yeah, no, I love this take because I mean let's face it, if you have Brian Robinson on your team starting, you most likely were not a juggernaut team, right? I mean, he you didn't have to pay a whole lot preseason to get him, right? And the perceived powerhouse teams are the people who had Bijan Robinson, right? So I mean
The
it's
wrong B Rob.
interesting.
Or B
I
Rob.
know the wrong B Rob where Brian's actually having better stats right now than Bijan, but you can never get that trade done still, to your point with dynasty value. So yeah, I love it from the lens of, you're probably a rebuilding team and yeah, just try to hunt down a contending team and yeah, because his this is probably his peak value. You can get a pretty decent assets in a trade with. So yeah, if you can get a first and a piece, I would definitely smash that deal for sure.
Yeah, I have a couple of scenarios I'll run by you guys because right now on Keep Trade Cut crowdsourced data, right now Brian Robinson's RB14, which is getting up there. So, do you think if a contender had Jonathan Brooks and you were like, you know what, I, I'll trade you my Brian Robinson Jr. straight up for your Jonathan Brooks, and if that as a contender, do you think that contender accepts that deal right now?
It depends entirely on what the contender's running back room looks like. I mean, and in your scenario, are you saying like the contending team is giving up Brian Robinson or getting
They're
Brian
they're
Robinson?
getting Brian Robinson, so they're bolstering their team. Let's say they're 4-1 right now, 5-0, whatever. They're
Sure.
they're they're going for it. I mean, right now Brian Robinson Jr. is one of the safest running backs in fantasy football
Sure.
in 2024.
Yeah, I think it's the time to ask that question. I mean, if they need the running back help and they don't want to wait for Brooks to get on the field in a handful of weeks, and maybe even when Brooks gets on the field, he's not completely supplanting Chuba Hubbard until the end of the year, if not until 2025, then I think this is the time to try to make that deal where you go ahead and you get a much better prospect in the form of Jonathan Brooks, a guy with a at least an equal in theory, opportunity to be a bell cow in his backfield. I think now's the time to try to do that. Whereas that would have been laughable deal to make a few weeks ago.
No, exactly. I mean, those are things that I kind of think about. It just like how can I capitalize on my investment that was Brian Robinson? How can I use that asset that's gained value and upgrade to, I think, a safer guy in Jonathan Brooks. Because right now, I mean, Chuba Hubbard looks pretty good too. So it's like maybe that manager's like, you know what? Maybe Chuba Hubbard and I mean, isn't just going to go away when Jonathan Brooks is is healthy and ready to go. And then this might sound crazy, and I would never do this, but do you think somebody would be crazy enough to sell after a tough couple of weeks for Brees Hall? Do you think Brian Robinson and a 25 first for Brees Hall? You think people are doing that?
I'm gonna let Aaron go first on this one.
With Brees Hall. No, I don't think there's. I can't see it happening. I mean, in any of the leagues that we're in, I mean, there's just. I mean, again, you just pay. You pay too much for Brees Hall. I mean, there's a lot of managers that just stick on to that value, whether or not they perform or not. So, I still think Hall is an elite talent, and I want to give him up for Brian Robinson in a first.
Yeah, the answer is no. I still don't think that's going to be on the
Agreed.
table, and I wouldn't do it either. But the real question is, if you really want to put the screws to us on this one, Ethan, I guess I'll do that for you. Is
Okay.
so what if it's your contending team, you're sitting on Brees Hall, and someone who isn't really doing it at least the last 2 weeks, and they come to you and they say, okay, I'll give you Brian Robinson and a first round pick in 2025. What do you think then?
Ryan Robinson and a 25 first for.
You're Brees Hall, who's not helping you as a contender.
Oh, I know. Like I said, I posed the question to you guys initially. I would reject it. Like I said, I was never a big Brian Robinson fan, but I'm still hitching my wagon to Brees Hall. He's too talented. He's too good. The thing is, a guy like Brees Hall, he's so insulated. Guys like Brian Robinson, they get hurt or they have a few down weeks, their value starts tanking. That's why these guys like, yeah, exactly. These guys like Brees Hall, these insulated assets are so valuable because you know what? They can withstand injuries. They can withstand bad performances. Where guys like Jordan Mason, Brian Robinson Jr., they get hurt and miss time. The dynasty community forgets about them very, very fast, and their value just tanks. So that's why it's like you got to be able to react in dynasty. You got to sell. Sometimes you sell windows are so small, and you got to make moves rather quick because once you miss that sell window, you might have an aging dying asset on your team.
Absolutely. And that's why I think that Brian Robinson was the perfect guy to sell at this particular moment in time because his value was up, because he's scoring points each and every week, giving you those high floor games. And this is the time right now to get a player like that off of your team and pivot over to a safer asset that's going to have more long-term value and hopefully someone who can continue to score points for you in 2024. But that was a really fast, fun, quick hitting episode on some buys and some sells. Really fun to cover all that, folks. We're going to do more Dynasty content in season than we have at any point in the past on the Dynasty front. So we're looking forward to all that, folks. If you like what you saw, click that subscribe button. We're going to talk redraft, DFS, Dynasty, everything fantasy football related. The season's in full swing, so we couldn't be having any more fun than we are right now. But until next time, folks, peace.